Tuesday night in River North always sounded like money, even when the street was quiet. The elevators in Moretti Holdings moved like they had manners, and the glass walls reflected a Chicago skyline that never blinked. I should have been home an hour ago, helping Lily practice spelling words, letting her fall asleep with her hair damp from the bath. Instead, I was on the 38th floor, alone with a desk lamp, a half-finished report, and the kind of silence that makes you hear your own thoughts too clearly. Mia Carter was on speaker through my phone, keeping me company the way she always did when I refused to admit I was lonely. She had that bright, nosy energy that made everything feel lighter, and I let it because I needed it. I twisted the pen between my fingers, fixed a typo, and tried not to think about the door behind me. People in this building didn't knock. They appeared. I told Mia about my boss the way I told her about weather, like I was reporting facts. Enzo Moretti was professional, organized, always in control. He ran a company that looked legitimate on paper, and nobody asked why certain meetings ended the second I walked into the room. I had learned not to ask either. My job was calendars and contracts and coffee at exactly the right temperature. My job was to be invisible. That invisibility was not an aesthetic choice. It was survival. I was a single mom in a city that chewed up soft people, and I couldn't afford to be soft. Lily needed rent paid on time, a fridge that wasn't empty, a mother who came home even when her legs shook from working too late. So I kept rules. Real rules, typed and saved in a hidden folder on my laptop. Stability rules, in all caps, like yelling at myself before I made another mistake. Mia teased, as usual, pushing at the edges of my discipline. I pretended to be annoyed, but the truth was I liked having someone who could say the things I refused to say. I mentioned Enzo's smile, the one that looked consequence-free. I mentioned his suits, the way he wore them like armor. I should have stopped there. I didn't. Somewhere around 6:40 in the evening, with the floor empty and my shoulders burning from holding tension all day, Mia asked what I actually wanted. I heard myself answer before I could filter it, before I could remember that walls have ears and power has habits. I confessed, out loud, that I wanted to see him without the suit, without the layers, without the polished protection. I framed it as curiosity, like that made it safe. My cheeks went hot the second the words landed in the air. Mia made a sound through the speaker, delighted and horrified at the same time, and I started to backpedal in my head. I reached behind my monitor for the charger that had fallen, turning my back to the doorway like an idiot. I told myself the office was empty. I told myself no one stayed this late. I told myself a lot of lies. When I spun back, I saw him. Enzo stood in the open doorway of his office, one hand on the frame, tie slightly loosened, expression unreadable. Not surprise. Not anger. Something colder and more precise, like he had just been handed information he could store and use later. The air changed. My lungs forgot how to work for a beat, and my brain did what it always did under stress. It started counting seconds. I ended the call too fast, not because I was brave, but because I couldn't tolerate Mia hearing the silence. Enzo walked in with the unhurried confidence of someone who owns every hallway. He sat at his desk as if this was any other night. He didn't accuse me. He didn't flirt. He simply watched me with dark eyes that made my skin feel seen, and then, in a voice that stayed low and even, he repeated a single word I had used like a joke. Armor. My stomach dropped because he said it like a label, not a tease. Like he had weighed it and decided it belonged to him now. I turned back to my screen, pretending I could still read the report, pretending my hands weren't shaking. The silence between us was thick, full of everything I wasn't saying. I thought about the hidden folder on my laptop, the one Mia didn't know existed, and how rule number 1 sat at the top in bold. Never get involved with Enzo Moretti. I had written it 2 years ago after I realized what kind of man he was, and what kind of power followed him like a shadow. I finished the report on muscle memory, eyes moving while my mind stayed stuck on that one word. Armor. He let me leave without stopping me, which was its own kind of control. In the elevator, my reflection looked composed, like a stranger wearing my face. Outside, the wind off the river cut through my coat and woke me up. I checked my phone for a photo of Lily sleeping at Grandma Rose's, and guilt hit enough to bruise. Tomorrow I would pack lunches, tie shoelaces, and walk into that office like nothing happened. Invisible. Professional. Safe. Except I knew better now. The building had heard me. And so had he. Morning came too fast, like the city had hit fast forward while I slept. Lily padded into the kitchen in mismatched socks, hair wild, eyes hopeful. Grandma Rose already owned the stove, flipping pancakes in my battered skillet and humming like nothing could break her rhythm. I set my phone face down, because if I saw my work notifications before Lily's smile, I'd lose the whole day before it started. I built Lily's lunch the way I build agendas, neat, efficient, impossible to argue with. Apple slices, a sandwich cut into triangles, a juice box, and a sticky note that said I loved her in handwriting that looked rushed because it was. I checked the time, then checked it again. Rose watched my constant time math and made the tiniest sound of disapproval. She didn't lecture. She just moved closer, wordlessly taking over the dishes so I could breathe. At the school drop-off line, I held Lily's backpack strap a second too long. The hallway smelled like crayons and sanitizer, and the normalness of it hit me hard. This was why I worked late and stayed quiet and followed rules. A kid who felt safe enough to skip into class without scanning faces for danger. When Lily disappeared into her room, I forced my shoulders down and promised myself I'd be invisible again. River North wore its weekday mask by the time I arrived, suits, coffee, glass towers reflecting a sky that never decided on one color. Moretti Holdings looked exactly as it always did, sleek, expensive, calm in a way that suggested the building had never heard the word panic. Security nodded at me by name, and that tiny fact made my skin tighten. I rode the elevator up, rehearsing a professional face in the mirrored wall like it was another practiced mask. My desk greeted me with overnight emails and a calendar packed tight enough to choke. I threw myself into it, because competence is the only kind of emotion this office respects. The more my mind replayed last night, the cleaner my work became. I made calls disappear, shifted meetings by 5 minutes, created space where none existed. If I was flawless, maybe the universe would forget I had ever been human on speakerphone. Enzo's door stayed closed for the first hour, and I told myself that meant he'd chosen mercy. Then it opened a fraction, and the air changed the way it changes before rain. He didn't summon me. He didn't trap me in a hallway. He simply existed nearby, a presence I could feel even when I kept my eyes on my screen. When I passed his doorway with documents, I caught him still at his desk, reading numbers like they were a language he could weaponize. Vince Romano lingered down the hall, leaning against the wall with a posture that looked relaxed until you noticed his eyes. He didn't talk much. He didn't need to. He was the kind of man who watched doors, exits, and faces without ever appearing to. When his gaze flicked to me, it wasn't curiosity. It was assessment, as if he was measuring how close I was to becoming something that mattered in Enzo's world, and whether that was a risk or a plan. Around mid-morning, a calendar alert vanished. A client meeting I'd scheduled weeks ago, the kind that always ran long, simply wasn't there anymore. In its place sat a clean block labeled off-site. No explanation. No request. Just a fact placed into my day like a chess move. I assumed I'd made an error, until I checked Lily's classroom newsletter and saw her reading celebration was today, late afternoon, the one event I'd already accepted I would miss. I walked to Enzo's doorway with my clipboard held tight, pretending it was just another question about logistics. He looked up at the exact moment I arrived, like he'd been waiting for me to notice. I didn't thank him. Gratitude felt dangerous. I pointed out the change and waited. His expression didn't soften, but his gaze dropped briefly to my hands, to how hard I was gripping my clipboard. When his eyes returned to mine, he used one word, softly, a reminder from last night that landed like a blade: armor. At 3:30 in the afternoon, I sat in a tiny classroom chair while Lily held up a paper crown and grinned like she had invented sunlight. Rose snapped a photo, proud enough to make my throat ache. 40 minutes later I was back downtown, heels clicking, mind already switching gears. The office was thinner, quieter. Enzo walked past my desk without stopping, but I felt the silent acknowledgement anyway. He had given me time, and I had used it. I stayed late to finish a report I could have pushed to tomorrow, because leaving early felt like admitting I needed him. The floor emptied. The lights dimmed. Somewhere behind me, I sensed Enzo still there, patient as a shadow. I told myself I could keep Rule 1 intact if I worked hard enough. But the truth pressed in anyway. He had noticed my life, my limits, my child. And once someone like Enzo starts noticing, he doesn't stop. I kept typing, pretending the office was just an office, while my instincts counted footsteps. If he came out again tonight, I knew the line would be tested, quietly, always, by him. The office after hours had a different temperature, like the building cooled down once it stopped pretending to be friendly. Only my desk lamp was on, a small island of light in a floor of glass and shadow. Outside, Chicago flashed in clean lines, traffic far below, the river reflecting neon like it was keeping secrets. I checked my phone and saw the time edging past 8, which meant Lily would already be in pajamas at Grandma Rose's place, asking why Mom worked so much. I told myself I was finishing one last report, then going home. I told myself a lot of things. I worked with the kind of focus that feels like a dare. If I typed fast enough, maybe my mind would stop replaying last night, the slip of my confession, the way Enzo listened as if he were filing evidence. My inbox filled and I handled it all, because competence is my strongest disguise. Down the hall, Vince Romano waited near the elevators, coat on, posture loose, eyes sharp. He looked like security and like a warning. Every time he glanced toward Enzo's door, I felt the floor tighten. Enzo stayed behind his closed door until the building settled into its late-night hush. I heard the faint sound of a chair, the soft click of a laptop closing, then footsteps that didn't hurry. When he appeared in the hallway, the silence tightened, as if the air itself took a step back. He did not approach my desk like a boss checking on an employee. He approached like a man measuring distance. I kept my eyes on the screen, pretending the numbers mattered more than the presence. In my head, I repeated Rule 1 from my hidden file stability rules, like a prayer with sharp edges. Never get involved. Never confuse attention for safety. I sensed him stop near my doorway. He didn't demand an explanation or punish me with embarrassment. He treated the moment like a fact. I had spoken out loud, and he had heard me. He wasn't asking me to fix it, just refusing to pretend it never happened. The restraint in that felt heavier than any scolding. My throat tightened, my hands went cold on the keyboard, and I understood he was giving me the most dangerous thing in his world, choice. Vince shifted first. He checked his phone, scanned the hallway, and then moved, quiet and deliberate, disappearing into the elevator without looking back. The doors closed with a soft sigh, and the floor became just me and Enzo and the glow of my lamp. Enzo stepped closer, slow enough that it felt like he was offering me time to retreat. He stopped on the other side of my desk, not invading, just present. I lifted my eyes, and the look in his face wasn't playful. It was controlled honesty, the kind that cost something. In that stillness I understood what he was telling me without needing him to say much. For 2 years he had kept the line because he chose to, not because he didn't want more. The knowledge hit my body before it hit my brain. I stood up too fast, chair scraping, and my hand moved on instinct, pressing flat against his chest over the suit jacket he wore like a shield. It wasn't a shove. It was me trying to create space without running. Under my palm he was solid and warm, and that warmth was information I didn't want. For a fraction of a second my hand stayed there, refusing to obey Rule 1. His gaze dropped to my fingers, and he used the word armor again, softly, as if naming what I had just touched. I pulled my hand back, expecting him to close distance, but he didn't. He stayed, letting my decision stand. That steadiness shook me more than pressure. I realized my rules weren't protecting me anymore, they were proving how badly I needed them. I pulled my hand back as if it had burned me, grabbed my bag, and walked out with a posture that pretended I knew exactly what I was doing. The elevator mirror showed a woman who looked composed, but my eyes were too bright and my mouth was too tense. On the ride down, I tried to reassemble my thoughts into something logical. He hadn't touched me. He hadn't asked for anything. He had only admitted that restraint was a choice, and somehow that was more dangerous than any flirtation. Outside, the cold air slapped my cheeks awake. I called Grandma Rose in my head without dialing, imagining her voice telling me to stop borrowing trouble. When I finally got home, Lily was asleep on my couch bed, small hand curled around the stuffed rabbit she refused to outgrow. I knelt beside her and felt my chest ache with love and guilt, the kind that always travel together. Later, in my own bed, the ceiling looked too close. I opened my laptop and hovered over the hidden folder, but I didn't dare change anything. Rule 1 stayed black, firm, like a fence I was afraid to test. My phone buzzed on the nightstand, a number I didn't recognize lighting the screen. I stared at it until the vibration stopped, then started again, persistent as a memory. I didn't answer. I just lay there, listening to the dark, wondering which was more dangerous now, the man who had finally stopped pretending, or the past that had found my number. At 2:15 a.m. my phone buzzed again, the same unknown number, relentless as a dripping faucet. I stared at the screen until it went dark, then lit up with a name I had not seen in years, Tyler Grant. My stomach went cold before my mind caught up. He left when I was 24, pregnant, and scared enough to taste metal. Now his contact sat there like a reopened wound, asking for nothing but attention. I put the phone face down, but the vibration kept traveling through the mattress into my bones. I promised myself I would not answer, ever. Tyler had always sounded gentle, even when he was doing damage. Back then he held my hand at doctor appointments and said we would figure it out, right up until the day he did not. I remember standing in my tiny bathroom with a positive test and a sudden silence where his certainty used to be. He left a note on the counter, not cruel, just empty, like he was stepping away from a problem he could not solve. I did not beg. I learned to swallow tears, pay bills, and build rules that did not depend on promises anymore. By 6:30 a.m. Lily was warm to the touch, frowning in her sleep. Rose pressed her palm to Lily's forehead with the calm of a woman who has raised children through worse than fevers. I canceled daycare, messaged the school, and tried to calculate how many hours I could lose without the week collapsing. Lily woke crying because her throat hurt, and I hated that my mind went to spreadsheets instead of comfort. I made tea, cut toast into small pieces, and sat beside her until her breathing evened out. Rose hovered nearby, steady, letting me learn to breathe. I still went in late, because rent does not care about fevers. Rose promised to stay with Lily and text updates, and I kissed my daughter's damp hair, apologizing into it. On the train I checked my phone and saw Tyler's name again, now with messages that tried to sound respectful while pushing for a reply. He was in Chicago for work. He wanted to talk. I deleted nothing, because deleting feels like admitting fear. When I reached the building, the lobby guards nodded, and I wondered who else knew my schedule. The thought followed me into the elevator, heavy. Upstairs, my hands moved on autopilot until I saw my empty palm. No coffee cup. For 2 years I had delivered Enzo's coffee without thinking, a small ritual that proved I could be trusted with details. Today I had walked straight past the break room, head full of Lily's fever and Tyler's messages. I placed the tablet on Enzo's desk and felt the missing weight like a siren. He looked at the clear space where the cup should be, then at me. His eyes did not ask about coffee. They read my face, the way a scanner reads barcode, exact. I tried to minimize it, telling myself everything was fine, that I did not need help, that a mother handles her own mess. Enzo did not argue. He looked at his screen and adjusted my day with the calm he used for deals. A meeting became a call. A site visit vanished. A courier appeared with papers I had planned to collect. By noon my calendar had space I had not earned. No one explained it, it just happened. His protection was logistical, not theatrical. And that made it worse, because it felt like he had been watching my limits. In the break room, Vince was already there, leaning on the counter like he belonged to the walls. He told me the security team had reviewed camera feeds near my building, just in case. He said it like routine, like everyone gets watched when they work for the Morettis. My hand tightened on the paper cup. I realized this net had been around me for a while. Vince looked at me with calm certainty, not threat. The message landed anyway. Enzo does not wait for danger to arrive. He puts it on a list, tracks it, and seals the doors. That evening Tyler called again, and I answered because avoidance is not closure, it is delay. His voice sounded older, smoother, and it scraped against memories I keep boxed for Lily's sake. He wanted a meeting and an apology, a chance to explain. Anger rose, hot and clean, because explanations do not change what abandonment did to my body. Still, part of me wanted the door sealed, not left ajar. I agreed to 1 coffee, 1 hour, in a neutral cafe. No dinner. No walk. No nostalgia. Just an ending I could schedule. I ignored how my hands kept shaking. I put the coffee meeting into my calendar like a task I could complete. Still, the thought of Tyler sitting across from me tightened my stomach. At work, Enzo said nothing about my buzzing phone, but his attention shifted whenever the screen lit up, like he was reading the shape of my distraction. He did not demand details. He simply adjusted my schedule again, clearing the late afternoon as if he expected trouble. I told myself it was coincidence. When the floor emptied, I stayed late anyway, because walking into the past felt more dangerous than any report. Tonight too. I set the rule before I left the apartment: 1 hour, 1 coffee, 1 goodbye. Neutral cafe near the river, bright enough that nothing could hide, noisy enough that no one could lean in too close. Grandma Rose had Lily for the evening, and Lily had her charm bracelet on, the one my mother had slipped into my palm the night before she died. I touched it on my daughter's wrist before I walked out, like a superstition. Tyler arrived early. He always liked being the person who waited, as if waiting was proof of devotion instead of strategy. He stood when I approached, smiling the same careful smile I remembered from the months when he was already halfway gone. I sat, set my phone face up, and watched the screen clock the way you watch a timer on a microwave. I reminded myself I wasn't there to feel anything. I was there to close a door. He started with the soft version of regret. He had been young, he had been scared, he had made a mistake he carried. He spoke as if time itself should count as effort. I listened with a calm I didn't entirely possess, because my body still remembered the day I stood in a clinic hallway alone, palm pressed to my stomach, trying not to cry in public. I remembered paying rent with borrowed money, learning to sleep in short bursts, learning to smile at strangers while my world cracked. Tyler's apology floated above those memories like perfume, pleasant and pointless. He kept nudging toward a future that didn't exist: coffee becoming dinner, dinner becoming a quiet try-again pitch, my life becoming something he could step back into without earning. I felt anger sharpen into something clean. I told myself that anger was good. Anger meant I had learned. At exactly the 50-minute mark I stood. The chair legs scraped, loud in the cafe's hum, and Tyler reached for my arm as if touch could rewrite history. I stepped back, not dramatic, just final. I walked toward the lobby, toward the glass doors, toward the cold air outside that promised distance. That was when a man Tyler knew stumbled out of the bar area inside the restaurant next door, loud and loose with alcohol. He spotted Tyler, shouted a greeting, then noticed me with the entitled curiosity of someone used to women smiling through discomfort. He said something about my legs, something about how Tyler always had good taste, and his eyes traveled like he had purchased the right. My stomach dropped. My throat tightened. I looked for the exit and calculated paths the way I always do when a room turns unsafe. Tyler stepped between us fast, puffing up like a man who wanted to win, not protect. The drunk laughed, leaning closer, bumping Tyler's shoulder. Tyler's voice rose. Mine stayed inside my chest, because I knew how fragile male pride becomes when it's soaked in whiskey. People in the lobby glanced over and then glanced away, the way crowds do when they smell trouble and want it to belong to someone else. I tried to leave. Tyler grabbed my wrist, not hard, but possessive, like I was part of the argument. I yanked free and the motion snapped the clasp of Lily's bracelet against my skin. I felt it shift, a tiny slip, and I told myself I would fix it once I was outside. The drunk took a step forward. Tyler took one too. In that second the air changed, the way it had changed on my office floor when Enzo entered a hallway. I turned, and there he was at the lobby entrance, dark coat over a suit, face unreadable, eyes steady. Vince Romano stood a few paces behind him, scanning corners like he was reading invisible lines on the floor. Enzo didn't rush. He didn't speak loudly. He simply watched the drunk man with a stillness that felt like a final warning. The drunk's smile faltered. His shoulders dropped as if some instinct finally remembered consequences. He muttered something that sounded like a joke and backed away, suddenly eager to disappear. Tyler stared at Enzo, trying to recognize what kind of man could quiet a room without raising his voice. Tyler had never understood power. He had only understood attention. Enzo's gaze flicked to me first, quick and complete, checking for damage he didn't need words to name. Then his eyes returned to Tyler with the cold politeness of a closed door. Vince stayed silent, but his presence made the lobby feel smaller. I left. I didn't say goodbye to Tyler. I didn't thank Enzo. I walked out into the night and ordered a rideshare with shaking hands, breathing through my nose like that could keep my heart from climbing out of my ribs. In the back seat I reached for my wrist out of habit. My fingers found bare skin. The bracelet was gone. I searched the seat, the floor mat, my coat pocket. Nothing. My chest caved in with a grief that had nothing to do with Tyler. That bracelet wasn't jewelry. It was my mother's last touch, passed to Lily, proof that love can outlast bodies. I pressed my palm to my mouth and cried silently all the way home, hating myself for believing I could control a night that involved men like Tyler, men like Enzo, and a world that notices weakness. The next morning I put on makeup and wondered what Enzo would do. I walked into Monday like I hadn't slept, because I hadn't. Lily's wrist looked naked when I kissed her goodbye, and my stomach stayed hollow all the way downtown. Grandma Rose texted updates about the fever breaking, but my mind kept replaying the lobby, the scrape of shoes, the moment the bracelet vanished. In the elevator at Moretti Holdings, my reflection had makeup hiding nothing. I told myself it was metal and beads, not a lifeline. Then I pictured my mother's hands fastening it on Lily, and my throat tightened. If Enzo mentioned it, I didn't know what I'd do. The break room smelled of roasted coffee and disinfectant, usually a neutral corner I used to breathe. Today it felt staged. 2 cups sat on the counter, steam rising, lids aligned. Enzo stood beside them with his hands in his pockets, suit perfect, eyes calm. He didn't speak first, he didn't need to. I set my bag down slowly, trying to remember how to act normal. His gaze flicked to my bare wrist, then back to my face, like he was confirming a suspicion. I wondered how long he'd known, and why my heart kept answering before my mouth did. Without announcing anything, Enzo placed a small clear pouch on the granite. Inside, Lily's charm bracelet lay coiled, the tiny heart charm catching the light. My breath left me hard enough to make my eyes sting. Relief hit first, then something sharper, anger at myself for letting a stranger's ego put my daughter's keepsake at risk. I didn't ask how he found it, but the answer hovered anyway: Vince Romano, cameras, hands that move faster than paperwork. Enzo watched me close my fist around it as if he understood what it meant. I hated that my knees felt weak with gratitude. I tried to thank him, but words jammed behind my teeth, too small for what I felt. Enzo's hand lifted, paused, and then brushed my cheek with the lightest contact, like he was asking permission from my skin. I froze, not from fear of him, but from fear of myself, of how quickly my body leaned towards safety. His fingertips lingered 1 second longer than necessary, and my pulse answered. Then his phone rang. The warmth drained from his eyes as he turned away, voice dropping into business calm, the building snapping back around him. I stood there, bracelet burning. The rest of the day moved in clipped segments. I filed contracts, answered emails, and pretended my cheek wasn't still warm. Every few minutes I checked Rose's texts, counting Lily's coughs in my imagination. Enzo didn't mention last night, and that silence felt deliberate, a line he refused to cross while danger hovered. Vince passed my desk once, giving a single nod, as if returning a bracelet was as routine as delivering mail. When I finally left, I clasped the charm back onto Lily's wrist with shaking fingers and promised myself I would not gamble again. My voice sounded unconvincing. At 2 a.m., sleep refused to arrive. Lily breathed evenly in the next room, and the apartment felt too quiet for the storm in my head. I opened my laptop and clicked into the hidden folder. Stability rules glowed on the screen like a warning sign. Rule 1 stared back in black: never get involved with Enzo Moretti. My cursor hovered, then I changed the font color to gray. Not erased, not forgiven, just reconsidered. Before I could talk myself out of it, I snapped a screenshot and sent it to Mia, needing someone to know I was moving. Finally. Mia replied before sunrise, the message vibrating with the kind of delight that made me roll my eyes and smile anyway. She didn't let me pretend gray was nothing, she treated it like proof. I deleted the thread and went to work with that admission echoing in my pocket. Enzo's office door sat slightly open, not wide, just enough for a line of sight. When I passed, he looked up, and for a second his attention felt personal, not managerial. Later he requested my input on a small decision, and I realized he was pulling me closer without naming it. On Wednesday, Vince handed me a folder for an upcoming charity gala, the kind of event where smiles are currency. I recognized one name on the guest list and felt my stomach drop before I understood why: Serena Vitali. I'd heard it once in passing, like a cautionary note spoken in Italian and then swallowed. Enzo didn't react when I scanned the list, but the air around his office grew tighter, as if the building remembered history. I told myself I was imagining things. Still, I found myself straightening my blouse and checking my reflection, resenting the impulse already forming. By Friday, the door to Enzo's office stayed cracked open more often than closed, and I stopped pretending it was accidental. I moved through the day with Lily's bracelet safe, my rules unsettled, and my heart louder than my logic. The gray text in my file felt like a decision waiting for a signature. I could feel Enzo's attention even when he said nothing, like a hand hovering near a bruise. The gala date sat on my calendar like a storm warning. I didn't know what Serena would awaken in him, or what she would awaken in me next week. Charity nights at Moretti Holdings were built to look soft. Soft lights, flutes, music that pretended nobody in the room carried sharp edges. I wore my black dress like a uniform and my tablet like a shield, moving between donors, schedules, and silent nods from men who never introduced themselves. The city skyline glittered through the glass, and I reminded myself I was here to work, not to feel. Enzo arrived late, as he always did, and the crowd shifted before he even reached the room. I watched the way shoulders straightened, smiles tightened, and conversations lowered half a notch. Vince Romano hovered near the back wall, calm as a locked door, eyes sweeping exits while I pretended not to notice. I saw Serena Vitali before I knew I was looking for her. She entered like a headline, sleek hair pinned, red gown cut with confidence, and a smile that carried research. People recognized her and made space, not out of courtesy but out of memory. She paused only once, letting the room register her, then turned toward Enzo with the ease of someone who already knew where he stood. My stomach did that drop I hate, the one that says I care. I told myself it was neutral data, just a former partner returning for a fundraiser. Still, my fingers tightened on the tablet. I could feel the gray rule in my laptop file flicker in my mind. Enzo's face did not soften when he saw her. It changed in a quieter way, like a door opening to a hallway he had sealed. Recognition, not longing. History, not affection. That was worse, because history has gravity. Serena spoke to him with practiced intimacy, and he answered with measured politeness, giving her exactly enough attention to be correct and not a fraction more. I stayed 4 steps away, close enough to interrupt, far enough to be background. I tracked the room the way I track meetings: who leaned in, who watched, who waited. Every so often Enzo's eyes flicked toward me, quick, checking, as if my location mattered to his balance, and I hated how proud that thought made me. 20 minutes later the signal came, subtle as always. Enzo's hand touched my shoulder for half a second, the business cue we use to create interruptions without scenes. My body moved on training. I stepped in with a manufactured problem, redirecting him toward an imaginary donor, and he followed without hesitation. We crossed the room together like nothing had happened, and only when we reached the quieter corridor did I realize what he had done. He had used our signal to escape Serena. Not a negotiation, not a delay, an exit. The realization hit my ribs like a sudden laugh I refused to release. If he wanted distance from her, he could have walked away on his own. Instead he chose the one method that required me, my competence, my presence. I wondered who he was protecting, himself, or me. Serena found me near the silent auction tables, moving like she had been invited into every room in the city. She held a glass of wine and angled her smile at me with the precision of a blade. She spoke my name with familiarity that felt purchased, then let her eyes land on my left hand, the place where a ring would be if my life were simpler. Her gaze shifted to my purse, where a child sticker peeked from the seam, and her expression sharpened. She did not insult me outright, she didn't need to. She implied that men like Enzo collect complications the way others collect art, admire them, then lock them away. She implied that motherhood is a handle enemies can grab. I kept my voice calm in my head and reminded myself I had survived worse than cruelty. I told her that I was not small. After the event, Vince drove while the city blurred past the tinted windows. Enzo sat beside me in the back seat, tie still perfect, jaw set like he was holding something in place. He didn't ask what Serena said, he already knew she had approached me. His attention kept returning to my face, as if he could read the aftertaste of that conversation. When we were alone in the hallway outside his office, he let the silence settle, then gave me the simplest truth. He had used the signal because he wanted out, and he wanted out because I was there. Complicated was acceptable in business, complicated was not what he wanted with his past in front of me. The warmth in that admission scared me more than Serena's warning. At home, Lily slept sprawled across her bed, bracelet glinting on her wrist like a small promise I'd kept. I watched her chest rise and fall and felt jealousy twist into something uglier than romance. It wasn't about being chosen over Serena. It was about being seen at all, about the way Enzo's world could turn a mother into a target. I sat on the edge of Lily's blanket and understood that my feelings had started to become information. I hated that I cared. I hated that I wanted more. And somewhere under the hate, I felt a quiet certainty that Enzo was about to step closer, not farther again. The gala proved one thing, I couldn't pretend neutrality anymore. If he asked for a real dinner, I might say yes. If I said yes, I'd need to be ready. He didn't call it a meeting, and that was how I knew it wasn't work. The calendar block he sent me was just an address in the West Loop and a time that didn't touch office hours. No agenda. No attachments. No request for my tablet. He handed me the invitation the way he handed me evidence, quiet, precise, already decided. I nodded like it was ordinary, then spent the rest of the day hearing my own heartbeat inside every email. Rule 1 instability rules stayed gray in my mind, hovering as if it could change color without permission. That evening I drove Lily to Rose's apartment with a bag of pajamas and the charm bracelet clasped safely on Lily's wrist. Rose watched me pack snacks like I was preparing for war, and maybe I was. I told Lily I'd be back before she dreamed too hard, kissed her forehead, and left while she was still smiling. In the car, I tried to convince myself this dinner was a mistake I could control. But longing is not a thing you schedule. Neither is fear. Both rode with me downtown, quiet and heavy. I kept checking mirrors, like danger followed. The restaurant was small, warm, and stubbornly unimportant, the kind of place that didn't care who owned half the city. Enzo arrived without an entourage, coat collar turned up, eyes scanning out of habit. He chose the table with his back to the wall, then looked at me as if asking whether I noticed. I did. Over food that tasted like comfort, he let pieces of himself slip through, a father who built an empire and called it love, expectations that never ended, loneliness disguised as discipline. I listened, surprised by how easy listening became, as if body trusted him. When he paused, I filled the space with my own truth, the way single mothers do when silence feels unsafe. I told him about my mom's hands, always smelling like lotion and laundry soap, and the last night she pressed the bracelet into my palm for Lily. I explained how tiny objects can carry whole people, how I panic when I lose one. He didn't offer sympathy lines. He just stayed present, attention steady, like he was holding the story carefully. At some point I laughed, a real laugh, and realized I hadn't done that at work in months, maybe. Outside, the night air tasted like lake wind and car exhaust. He walked beside me without rushing, hands in his coat pockets, breath visible. I stopped under a street lamp and felt him hesitate, as if he was letting me decide the distance. His fingers lifted to my jaw, light enough to be a question, and I leaned into the warmth before I could talk myself out of it. The kiss that followed was brief, deliberate, and safe, like a door opening. Then his phone rang. His face closed, focus sharpening, and the man from the office returned instantly to duty. He left with a quiet apology I didn't deserve, and I rode home holding the memory like contraband. Rose texted that Lily had finally slept, and I stared at the message until my eyes burned. In my apartment, I checked the locks twice, then watched Lily's chest rise and fall, thinking how easily my choices could touch her life. I still felt his hand at my jaw when I brushed my teeth. The next morning, Enzo moved through the office colder, not cruel, just sealed. I understood he was building distance in the name of protection, and it hurt anyway. On Thursday he asked me into his office with the door half open, as if secrecy itself had rules. He didn't circle the topic, he laid it down like a file. A rival group had been watching him, looking for leverage, and people close to him were the easiest pressure point. He admitted he had shown too much at the restaurant, that he had let the world see I mattered. My stomach dropped when I realized the sentence included Lily, even if he didn't say her name. My body went cold, then hot, then cold again, processing danger before thought. I wanted to argue that I could handle risk, but motherhood doesn't bargain with bullets you can't see. I nodded, because nodding was all I trusted myself to do. He didn't ask me to leave, didn't order me away. He simply changed the way he stood near me, moving his warmth back behind glass. Meetings became shorter. Messages became formal. Vince appeared more often in corridors, silent, watchful, the shadow of an answer I didn't want. I caught myself resenting Enzo for distance, then hating myself for it. Was this caring in his world, retreating to keep me alive tonight? By the weekend I moved through errands like someone learning a new map. I picked up Lily from Rose's, watched her chatter about spelling tests, and swallowed the urge to confess how scared I was. At bedtime I fastened the bracelet again, slower than necessary, and promised I would never let it leave her wrist. I lay listening to traffic, thinking how a kiss could become proof. On Monday, Enzo's door stayed closed. The space he left felt deliberate. I couldn't tell if he was protecting us or pushing us away, and I knew that question would decide next everything. 2 weeks after the West Loop dinner, the office looked the same, but it sounded different to me, like every hallway carried an echo. Enzo was present, efficient, polite, and sealed. I worked beside a closed door for my sake. At home, I watched Lily like the world had shifted a fraction. I checked the deadbolt twice, then pretended it was habit. I kept her bracelet on her wrist, and my hand brushed it whenever fear tried to speak first. The worst part was hating myself for imagining threats. Mothers are supposed to calm storms, not invite them. Yet my mind kept mapping Enzo's warning onto Lily's routine, turning playgrounds into escape routes before Smile had a chance to settle. In meetings, he let my report speak, never cutting in, never lingering after. He stopped using our shoulder signal, as if even that small touch had become dangerous. I told myself distance meant protection, nothing else, and repeated it daily. On Thursday, a contract came in late, the kind that could not wait for morning. I stayed after the last elevator emptied, typing under my lamp, hearing the building settle. By 8:30, my eyes burned, but I kept going. The lobby was mostly dark, security desk quiet, marble floors echoing my steps. Through the glass doors I saw a man outside, standing still, not checking a phone, not hailing a ride. Stillness with intent made my stomach drop immediately. I did not wait for proof. 2 years near Enzo had taught me the difference between ordinary waiting and surveillance. I turned, walked back to the elevators, and pressed the button with steady hands I did not feel at all. His office light was on. I walked in without knocking, the way you do when fear overrides etiquette. Enzo looked up once and understood, because he always did. He rose, reached for his phone, calm as if this was planned. He spoke into the receiver in short phrases I could not fully hear, but the name Vince landed. Then he looked at me and gave a simple instruction to stay inside. There was no argument in his posture, only certainty. He guided me to the conference room, not touching, just leading with space. The door between that room and his office stayed open a few inches, a quiet tether. I sat with my laptop closed, listening for footsteps in silence. Hours moved slowly. Vince checked in, a blur in the doorway, then vanished again, efficient as machinery. Enzo stayed nearby, making calls, watching screens, never pacing. I realized he was holding his fear in place so mine would not spill. I texted Rose to confirm Lily was asleep, then stared at the reply until my eyes blurred. The thought of that man outside followed me like a shadow. Was it coincidence, or did someone know I stayed late already here? Sometime after midnight, my body betrayed my vigilance. I fell asleep on the conference sofa with my coat still on, report unfinished on my lap. The building hummed around me, steady and indifferent, while my dreams stayed shallow and brief. When I woke, low morning light edged the windows, and a heavy wool jacket covered my shoulders. It smelled like cedar and cold air. I lay still, absorbing the warmth, then looked toward his doorway as if warmth could vanish. Enzo was asleep in his chair, head tipped back, tie loosened, suit rumpled at the shoulders. The sight cracked something in me. He looked less like an empire and more like a man who refused to leave until I rested. He woke when I stepped closer, eyes sharpening, then softening when he registered me. He told me he would fix what was circling us, and that he would stop using distance as a shield. I believed him, painfully for once. Then he added, quietly, that his people had already checked my building and Lily's school routes. The word routes made my skin go cold. He had thought past me, past my pride, straight to my child, and planned ahead always. Gratitude rose with fear tangled inside it. What did protection cost in his world, and who paid the bill? I looked at his loosened tie and realized the tenderness I wanted was the same thing that painted targets on us. When Vince finally confirmed the lobby was clear, I packed my bag with slow hands. Enzo did not walk me out, but his presence followed anyway. I carried his jacket sent home like proof that night happened and changed everything. At breakfast Lily chattered, unaware of how close fear had come to our door. I smiled and listened, but my mind replayed Enzo's calm promise. I sensed he would step into my real life soon, deliberately, without armor, without excuses. I finally admitted the story was not just about my heart. It was about the small hand I held at crosswalks, the bedtime prayers, the bracelet clasp. If I kept drifting, someone else would choose the next step for us. Would you have gone back up, or walked out into that lobby and hoped for luck? I had chosen the elevator, and now I understood that luck was not a plan. Enzo's world demanded decisions, not wishes from mothers alone. That weekend I waited for the other shoe, for a threat to announce itself, but nothing did. Silence can be mercy or a pause. On Sunday, I knew, Enzo would appear at my door and ask for time with me. Enzo showed up at my door on Sunday just after the church bells down the street finished arguing with the wind. No suit. No tie. Dark jeans, a plain sweater, and a coat that looked like it had actually seen weather. For a second my brain tried to reject the image, like it was a typo in a document I'd read 1,000 times. He stood there calm, hands empty, eyes softer than I was used to seeing in daylight. I felt my apartment shrink around me, not from fear, but from the absurd intimacy of him knowing where I lived and choosing to knock anyway. He asked for a walk, nothing scheduled, nothing traded. I didn't hear a condition hidden under it. That was what unsettled me most. I glanced toward Lily's room, then toward the hallway as if danger might be listening. Then I made myself breathe and nodded. Saying yes felt like stepping off a curb without looking down, but it also felt like choosing my own life for once. Outside, the city was bright and ordinary, and Enzo moved through it like he didn't need to dominate it. He didn't rush me. He matched my pace, letting silence exist without trying to fill it. When I spoke about Lily's latest obsession with stickers, he listened as if it mattered, not as if he was waiting for a chance to steer the topic back to himself. I kept noticing small things, how he stayed slightly to the street side of the sidewalk, how his gaze swept corners without making me feel hunted, how he never touched me without a reason. We reached the park where Rose liked to take Lily on weekends. I spotted them by the swings, Lily's pink hat bouncing as she ran. My stomach tightened on instinct, protective and territorial, because children don't belong anywhere near men like Enzo. Then Lily saw me and sprinted over, charm bracelet flashing on her wrist, and Rose followed at a measured pace with her sharp grandma eyes. Enzo stopped, letting me decide the distance, letting Lily decide the pace, and somehow that restraint was the first thing that made me exhale. Lily approached him with the fearless curiosity kids reserve for anything tall and unfamiliar. Enzo lowered himself to her level, not performing, just adjusting so he didn't tower. He let her study his face, then his hands, then the bracelet, and I watched him keep his own hands still, open, harmless. Rose's gaze stayed on him like a lie detector, and Enzo accepted it without irritation. Lily offered him a dandelion and he treated it like a gift instead of a joke. My chest did something painful and warm at the same time, because Lily looked comfortable, and comfort is the rarest currency in my life. We walked again after Rose took Lily back to the playground. Enzo didn't ask personal questions like an interrogation. He offered pieces of himself in small, careful ways, like he was setting them down to see if I'd pick them up. I found myself telling him about my mother's laugh, about how grief can sit quietly for years and then flare when a bracelet clasp clicks shut. He didn't fix me. He simply stayed close enough that I could feel steady without being trapped. Back at my apartment, he hovered in the doorway like he was waiting for me to revoke the invitation. I didn't. I put a kettle on, and he rolled up his sleeves as if kitchens were normal territory. He rinsed mugs, set them out, and didn't comment on the cheap cabinets or the kid drawings taped to the fridge. When Lily's rabbit peeked from the couch, he didn't smirk, he just moved it gently to the side so no one would sit on it. The domestic ease should have felt impossible. Instead it felt like a quiet answer. Later, after he left, I opened my laptop and went straight to the hidden folder. Stability rules stared back at me like an old friend and an old jailer. Rule 1 was still there in gray, waiting for me to either retreat or commit. I thought about Enzo kneeling in the park, about Lily's dandelion, about Rose's careful nod that meant she hadn't sensed danger. My finger hovered, then pressed delete. No fireworks. No speech. Just the lightness of a wall coming down. Monday morning there were 2 coffees on my desk before I arrived, one with the lid slightly tilted the way I like it so the steam cools faster. Enzo's office door stood open a crack, and when he looked up, his attention held me without claiming me. Vince passed by, saw the 2 cups, and the corner of his mouth lifted like he'd just won a bet he never announced. I sat down and tried to work, but I felt eyes in the hallway more than once. When I went to the break room for water, I caught myself scanning the counter the way I scan a crime scene, half expecting a new surprise. Peace, I realized, can make you visible, and visibility in Enzo's world is never free. Still, as I walked back to my desk, I sensed the building watching in a way. Someone else had learned our rhythm. Somewhere, a camera blinked. I told myself it was paranoia and didn't believe it. Monday felt almost normal. 2 coffees waited on my desk, lids tilted just the way I like, and for a reckless minute I believed peace could be routine. I had deleted Rule 1 from my hidden file stability rules, and the quiet victory hummed under my ribs while I opened emails. People passed my doorway slower than usual, like the floor had noticed the shift too. Vince walked by once, eyes amused, then vanished. Enzo's door stayed cracked open, not an invitation, just a reminder that he was watching. I told myself visibility was harmless, and believed it until noon. At 11:30, the hallway emptied for a leadership meeting downstairs. I went to the break room for water, enjoying the rare silence, and stopped in the doorway. An envelope lay on the granite counter, white and uncreased, placed with the precision of a surgical tool. No return address, no logo, only my name written in neat slanted letters. My skin went cold. I checked the room, the vents, the trash, as if danger could hide in ordinary objects. My hands hesitated, then lifted the envelope by its edge. It felt heavier than paper, like someone had folded intent inside. Inside was a photograph, glossy and cruelly clear. Enzo and I stood outside the West Loop restaurant, our faces turned toward each other in that brief moment before the world broke back in. Streetlights reflected off his coat, and my expression was unmistakably soft. In the corner of the frame, blurred but recognizable, was a small pink hat, Lily's, captured as she ran ahead with Rose earlier that day. My stomach dropped so fast my vision flickered. This was not a warning shot. This was proof someone knew where my life begins. I tasted metal, the same as first scare. I flipped the photo over. The handwriting was elegant, almost gentle, and that was the worst part. It congratulated me by name, then suggested I had finally become interesting, as if my feelings were entertainment for someone bored and powerful. My breath came shallow. I could not stop staring at the loops of ink, at the certainty that this person had been close enough to watch and still far enough to vanish. I thought of Enzo's warning about leverage, and for the first time I understood it as a mother, not a woman. Lily's bedtime stories suddenly felt like coordinates. I carried the envelope to Enzo's office with my hands held steady by anger. Vince was already there, leaning against the wall, phone in hand, expression neutral. Enzo took the photo without touching my fingers, and the temperature in the room dropped. His posture changed first, shoulders settling, jaw tightening, eyes going still. The warmth I had seen on Sunday vanished behind something older and harder. Vince examined the paper by the edges, noting the print quality, the angle, the timing, like he was reading a crime scene. No one raised a voice. Even buildings seemed to wait for orders. Vince pointed out that the photo was taken from across the street, close enough for my eyes to be readable. He said the envelope had been placed for me, not for Enzo, which meant the sender wanted my fear, not his attention. Enzo stared at the image a long moment, then looked at me with a gaze I had never seen at work or in my kitchen. He explained, calmly, that the danger was never my attraction. The danger was exposure. The moment someone learned what I mean to him, they found a way to cut him open from inside. My body reacted before my thoughts did. I imagined Lily walking out of school, tiny backpack bouncing, and a stranger using her name like a key. I felt sick. Enzo did not soften when he saw my panic. He promised, in the even tone he used for contracts, that he would handle it, but his eyes stayed on me like I was a problem he could not solve with money. I realized his protection was not romantic, it was tactical. And I had become a target with a bedtime routine. Would you run, or stay? I did not answer yet. Vince escorted me back to my desk while security swept the floor, and I kept the photo hidden in my bag like poison. At pickup, Lily ran into my arms, bracelet chiming, and I held her longer than usual. That night I did not tell her why I checked the window twice. I watched her sleep and understood Rule 1 had never been about my job. It had been about keeping my daughter invisible. Now she was visible. I made a vow in the dark, if anyone tried to use Lily, I would choose her safety over everything. No exceptions. This is only the beginning. Enzo will trace the handwriting and the camera angle, but I can feel the next move coming. I will go to work with my smile fixed and my fear awake, protecting Lily with every decision. If you were me, would you stay close to the man who can shield you, or run before his world closes around your child? Comment your theory, Who sent the envelope? Serena, Tyler, or someone unseen? And if you want part 2, support this story by liking, sharing, and subscribing. I will read comments, because your guesses help me choose.